Hello,
Hi.
and welcome to Willow and Sophia gathered here today to welcome in the fall and to bring in an exploration of one of the big symbols of the fall, which is the apple. So here's the apple is this from your tree outside? Yeah. Great. So I wanted to ask you, Willow, to begin. Um, what is the symbol of the apple as depicted in the Celtic traditions? Because I know you have a deep connection with the Celtic tradition.
Yes, I love the Celtic tradition. So the apple is the symbol of death and rebirth in the Celtic tradition. It's the symbol of the cycle of life. And as we all know, apples fall from the tree in the fall and go down, and then new apple trees grow up. So in the springtime, there's the apple blossom, which represents the maiden goddess. And the maiden goddess gets married often. And at her wedding, it's often bedecked with apple blossoms. So the Celtic tradition, the maiden was represented by the apple blossom. And then she moved into the mother goddess because she got pregnant shortly after the wedding. And then as the wheel of the year turns, we get into the fall, or the crone goddess. So the crone goddess represents the kind of letting go of the physical beauty and deepening. So the apple itself drops from the tree and descends down into the underworld. So it represents the letting go phase of life. And in the Celtic tradition, there's the goddess Morgane, and she would appear in the form of a raven and come across the battlegrounds or other places where people have died. And she would be carrying an apple in her mouth, in her beak. And she would pick up the soul of the deceased and carry it into the underworld cauldron of death and rebirth. And from that cauldron, she would be reborn. So, unlike the monotheistic traditions where God is up there and he's good and we're all down here and we're bad, they divided things often into triads instead of a dyad, instead of a polarity. They divided things into a triad. And each stage was considered sacred. Each stage was holy. The maiden, the mother, and the crone. So this whole dark goddess aspect, or the fall, or the descent into the underworld, was not considered bad. It wasn't considered evil. It wasn't even considered a problem. It might have been considered a challenge to deal with, but it wasn't considered a problem or a sin or something horrible to be avoided.
Right.
So there's some psychological components to that too, which is sometimes things fall apart in our lives, and sometimes the apple falls from our tree and turns into muck, or sometimes things that we want to grow end up getting eaten by squirrels or birds and kind of rotten.
You bite into a worm or something. Yeah.
So when I was picking these apples for my tree, about a fifth of them were these perfect, beautiful apples, and most of the rest of them were not so perfect. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, because usually we get our food from the grocery store and it's all perfect, but people who lived close to the land, the indigenous people, the Celts who were an indigenous people, they saw these rotten apples a lot. They didn't just see the perfect apples, and there was some deep spiritual wisdom in that for them too, dealing with the things that were less than perfect.
Yeah, and it seems like this is about integrating just everything, the whole cycle from,
Yeah.
not just having this obsession with staying a maiden forever or a perfect mom forever, but
Yeah.
actually going through the entirety and, yeah, and using the fall as that kind of
Yeah.
incubator.
So myself being definitely in the fall phase of my life, I'm very aware of this, how things have fallen apart, many things at this point in my life, and many new things have emerged too. Um, but there's also a correlation with the apple with the womb. It's always been a womb symbol in many traditions, and mainly because it's shaped like a womb, or maybe we should say a womb is shaped a bit like an
Yeah.
apple. And so this cauldron, this womb cauldron that the apple falls into, represents also our womb energy. And in the crone phase of your life, it's the menopausal years or the postmenopausal years where we hold our wise blood inside. So again, it's like gathering the wisdom of, instead of being so caught up in the physical fertility cycle, really getting into sort of the spiritual wisdom. So that's what happens at this stage. And I love it being a crone myself, and fall and the apples. I just love the congruency of it all.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, so that's our little bit about the Celtic tradition and the apple here in the autumn season. So I hope you really enjoy your fall.